And up next, I'm pleased to introduce today's second keynote speaker, CEO of Luta Security, acknowledged expert on bug bounties and vulnerability disclosures, the woman building bridges between corporate and hacker culture, and quite literally today's most colorful speaker, Ms.Katie Moussouris.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to pour myself some water while I get used to these lights and the time zone. And dismiss my alarm that says that I'm supposed to be on stage right now. Thank you. Oh yes, that would be great. My hair was brown, but the ozone layer here is a lot thinner, so this is a result of climate change. So what I'm talking about today, and the title of my presentation, some of you who are a little bit more literary-minded might recognize the reference. Waiting for NATO, an existential crisis in the cyberwar theater of the absurd. Well, for those of you who don't know me or don't follow me on Twitter, this is a word cloud of things that I normally tweet about, so things that I find very important, and the size of the words is how important I find them. So you can see that I have a penchant for theater, for performance, for karaoke, for hackers. I was a hacker for hire once in my career. It's been over a decade since anyone paid me to hack anything. But now I am the founder of a company called Luta Security, and we help governments and large organizations work with hackers more effectively. So what is it that I'm referring to when I talk about waiting for NATO and the theater of the absurd? Well, I've given you some reading material here. But really, we're talking about the fact that internet security has been going through the same absurd patterns without much effect for the last several decades. And I've been privy to a lot of the efforts, and I participated in a lot of the efforts to increase the security of the internet, mainly by trying to find and report as many vulnerabilities and get them fixed as possible. That is what vulnerability disclosure is. So how did we get here? Well, we didn't really build the internet with all of the things that we depend on in mind. We did not build it with the economic dependencies that we have in mind. We didn't build it with the military dependencies that we have in mind, and we certainly didn't build it with the idea that it would be part of our human evolution in terms of our ability to share knowledge and ideas. So in fact, our dependence on the technology that we've created has increased far faster than our ability to secure it. And this has been going on for quite some time. We've been warning you. Hackers have been warning all of the governments as much as we can for the better part of the last couple decades. Actually longer. About a decade before this photograph was taken, something called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was introduced in the United States because Ronald Reagan watched the movie War Games and was scared that a hacker was going to be able to hack into military systems and launch nukes. So he created a law that instead of making it easier for friendly hackers to report security vulnerabilities, such as the ability to hack into a nuclear facility, instead of making it easier for helpful hackers to report these things, made a lot of those discoveries of vulnerabilities, the activities that a hacker would do to find those vulnerabilities, in fact, illegal. So back in the late 80s, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was one of the first worldwide anti-hacking laws that there was. And unfortunately, what it ended up doing was having a chilling effect on security researchers where they were afraid to come forward because they were afraid of jeopardizing their freedom. So here we are, decades later, everything is broken. Our dependency on this technology is increased far past our ability to rein it back in, and we just had yet another event. Now, one thing I think about when I hear about this particular event with WannaCry is that there's all this blame on government hacking tools getting leaked out and then being turned into some sort of a criminal operation that affects, the global population. The fact of the matter is, any kind of security research can be turned into a weapon, potentially, right? Any published security research can. Any proof of concept code can. But unlike the knee-jerk reaction of trying to over-regulate and make it more illegal to share that kind of information, one of the things that I and my fellow hackers have been doing is trying to advocate making it easier for people to share that type of information. Why is that? It's because it actually helps defenders a whole lot more than it can help the attackers. And in fact, we're kind of remedial when it comes to applying the patches that we even have. We had patches for those vulnerabilities that were used in this particular malware attack. We had them for a month. They were out and they were available. But we were executing the usual security theater, and we weren't actually applying them, which is why you saw such a quick spread of the malware. So, quick, go to the regulators, right? Something bad is happening on the internet. Why don't we try and regulate it? Well, back in 2013, the Wassenaar Arrangement, of which I'm sure many of you are familiar, but for those of you who are not, it's an agreement between 41 different countries. It is basically designed as an export control agreement that is then implemented domestically via the export controls of each of those 41 countries. And it was traditionally used to control kinetic weapons and the knowledge to create those. It was a non-proliferation type of agreement. So in 2013, the Wassenaar Arrangement added intrusion software. The intent was to try and control these weapons, right? These things that could be used against innocent people, against dissidents, against journalists, and could be used to abuse human rights. So the intent was great. However, the wording matters. Code is not the only thing that can have a bug. Regulations and laws often come up with bugs, and frankly, with design flaws. And this was one of those examples. So, a lot of security researchers wanted the thing to just get wiped off the books. But in reality, we know that things are not that simple. It took a long time to get 41 countries to agree to the Wassenaar Arrangement language in the first place. And it is now taking a long time to revise that language. But that language does need to be revised, and I was one of the many voices on the internet that was advocating for that revision as far back as a couple of years ago, because it actually breaks the ability for the internet to defend itself. So back to the theater. This was an actual talk that I gave in New Zealand, because New Zealanders were willing to let me do this. So I did something called a karaoke note. Unfortunately, TSA would not let me bring any pyrotechnics here. But I did a little song, and there were dancers, and there was fire and everything, and then I actually gave a serious talk about Wassenaar. I was spinning on that hoop and singing live, so maybe if some of you would like to join me for karaoke later, we can find some place to do that. But what happened was, even though this was a very serious topic, what I was trying to do was get the attention of a group of hackers in another part of the world to pay attention to the fact that there can't be only a few of us who are willing to work with regulators and lawmakers and governments. There have to be more of us who are willing to dive into policy, no matter how distasteful it feels to us, and that it's a group effort. So, not as a result of this performance, but through other meetings that I was able to attend at the US Commerce Department and at other times, I was actually invited to become an official part of the US delegation to help renegotiate the Wassenaar Arrangement. That is my finger right next to the Wassenaar button, right there. I will be attending the meeting later this month in Vienna, where we'll continue to work on revising this such that it doesn't have those unintended consequences that affect defense. And what are some of those unintended consequences? Well, I started Microsoft's bug bounty programs back when I still worked for them as a security strategist. And one of the very first bug bounty programs, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes, was $100,000 for a new technique. It's not the same as an individual bug. It's not the same as an individual exploit. It's actually for a way to exploit bugs. Far more powerful than a single bug. There are things called mitigations that protect the entire platform. And they not only protect Microsoft software, but third-party software can opt into those mitigations and be protected from exploitation as well. So these things are a very powerful tool in your fight against being infected with malware, for example. So James Forshaw was a security researcher out of the UK, and I had given him this check before the Wassenaar arrangement had taken effect. If it had taken effect and if the UK had implemented its export controls, he may have never bothered to submit this entry because he would have had to fill out export control forms, and he probably wouldn't have done it because he had no idea how to or whether or not it applied to him. So the chilling effect on the advancement of defenders' knowledge in how to protect their platforms because of access to techniques like this, that was the kind of thing that we were trying to undo, and we still are trying to undo, with the work with the Wassenaar arrangement. So how did we get there? I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about the Microsoft bug bounties and how it evolved into the bounty programs of the US government, which how many of you heard about Hack the Pentagon? Okay, a couple of you, maybe in the back. So this was me on an actual hacking engagement where someone was paying me to do this. I was, before there was North Korea hacking Sony, there was me being hired by Sony to hack a couple of their online game titles. And why this was significant in my career was that I learned that it wasn't just hacking for hacking's sake. It wasn't just finding the same kinds of bugs. For example, credit card, ability to steal credit card numbers was a popular target for us as hackers, and most of our clients appreciated knowing about those security holes. The issue was really that I had to develop some empathy for their business and what they were really concerned about. Cheating on a video game, if it was easily enabled, would render that video game title useless, worthless to them. They had made an investment. So that actually helped me out when I was trying to create the bug bounty programs for Microsoft. So I stopped being a hacker for hire because I realized that even as a hacker myself, and even after founding vulnerability research programs at both Symantec and Microsoft to get more hackers to report more vulnerabilities, much like Project Zero does today with Google, we weren't getting anywhere because all code has security bugs, and we weren't addressing the problem holistically. It was theater of the absurd. So this came from Twitter, where so much wisdom comes from. But essentially, if you want something to be secure, fast, and cheap, that intersection is not likely to happen. But people have lately been talking about bug bounties. I am a huge advocate of bug bounties. I spent 3 years at Microsoft doing economic research, game theory research, all of the things, and channeling that empathy in order to figure out what was going to work for Microsoft, right? But there's a difference along this continuum of finding out about vulnerabilities. There's vulnerability disclosure, which is the basic capacity to receive a vulnerability report, figure out some kind of triage of how severe it is and what the priority is for fixing it, and then actually getting it fixed and communicating the fix to whoever needs it. That's vulnerability disclosure. There are ISO standards that I helped write, for which I'm an editor, that exist. How many of you have heard of these ISO standards for vulnerability disclosure? Barely any of you. And that is a huge problem. 94% of the global Forbes 2000 companies have no published way to even tell them that there's a vulnerability. So that old saying, if you see something, say something, well, not unless you're in that top 6% of the global Forbes 2000. It's insane because you know that they're spending tons of money on security products, security services, security awareness training, and it's theater. A lot of it is ineffective. Then there's penetration testing. So as an early penetration tester, I remember in the early 2000s, we were having a hard time convincing banks, for example, that they needed to hire hackers to help them point out their holes. There were trust issues. So, the consultants who became, or the hackers who became consultants, like myself, passed employment and background checks and were under non-disclosure agreements, and that provided enough comfort to the organizations that now nobody thinks twice about hiring hackers, professional hackers, to do a penetration test. And now we've moved into this era of opening things up to the world for something called bug bounty programs. It's cash rewards for bugs, similar to a penetration test, but it's usually on a per-bug basis. So the danger of this is that they can be too restrictive if they're too tightly scoped, but they can work if and only if your organization has the capacity to fix the bugs. So when I was at Microsoft, one of the fun facts that we had was that the email address secure@Microsoft was receiving over 200,000 non-spam email messages a year from helpful hackers trying to report a security vulnerability, and that was before we were paying them. So if you're ever wondering if hackers are mostly altruistic and mostly want to see things get fixed, I have some very good data that says that absolutely yes. So how has it been going for bug bounties? Well, we've definitely seen a huge uptick in the adoption of these types of programs. I would actually caution that it's getting a little out of hand too fast. It's alliterative, it's catchy, it has money involved. I helped launch many of the most high-profile programs on this list. What I'm happy to see about this is that it's moving out of traditional technology companies and into other types of companies. Car manufacturers like Tesla, and now Jeep Chrysler, which is not on there. Western Union, a shipping company. Credit card companies. And of course, you see that little logo there. That is the Department of Defense. So to create Microsoft's strategic bounty programs, I had to understand what Microsoft needed, because they were getting over 200,000 non-spam email messages a year. That's a lot of reports to go through. Microsoft, for a long time, was concerned, as many organizations are concerned, that if they offered cash, they would be overwhelmed. That was a real concern. They had over 800 supported products and services. There was no way that the bug bounties that others, like Google, were rolling out were going to work for them. It was not a cookie-cutter model. So, $100,000 for new techniques, those are very rare. Since the inception of this program, that award has been paid out around 5 times. There's some partial awards that have gone out as well. The rate of acquisition of those techniques in the wild before that program was 1 per 3 years. That was too slow to make the architectural changes needed in the operating system to correct some of those architecture failures. And so using this program, was able to draw out those who were interested and wanted to help. $50,000 for new defenses, because we didn't require proof of concept code. I believe that number has been bumped up to $100,000 now. And then this one, the $11,000 for IE11 beta bugs. So at the time, IE11 was about to be released. And this is the actual chart that I used to convince the head of IE to pay for his own bugs in a bug bounty program. So what you see there is the white is a graph of actual vulnerability reports that turned out to be true, critical, or important security vulnerabilities that resulted in a Microsoft bulletin. The graph showed a low volume of issues being reported during the beta period of IE10. That is the white graph. And then there was a huge spike after what event, do you think? After it came out of beta. Because we didn't realize we had created an incentive. It just wasn't money. The only incentive a researcher had to report a security vulnerability was the hope that their bug would be fixed in a security bulletin and they get their name in there, 12-point Arial font. And so we were inadvertently training them to find the bugs and hold on to them during the period where they would have been the most useful to us and to our customers. So when I look at the ecosystem and I look at vulnerability reporting and I look at bug bounties, we can't win on price alone. How many of you have heard of how much one vulnerability or exploit would be in the latest version of any browser, right? These are 6-figure sums that you can get for these items. But I was paying up to $11,000. Why is that? And why did it work? So the purple was the projection that I said to the head of IE that, look, if we put a bug bounty for the first 30 days of the IE11 beta period, we can attract those researchers who were already looking. They were already going to report them to us. They now will have a designated time to do it. They'll make a little bit of cash, and we'll put their name in lights. So it was true. We got a bunch of bugs. It was a success, and the program has been repeated since then. It was, in fact, a similar model that went into Hack the Pentagon. So these were the results of Hack the Pentagon, where we ended up wondering how many participants are going to be willing to trust that the US government isn't, in fact, going to throw them all in jail. I remember some hacker friends saying that they were concerned because the registration process required that they turn over their social security numbers. I had to kind of take them aside and say, guess what? The government gave you your social security number. And also, any employer in the United States who would like to pay you requires you to turn over your social security number. So, able to ease their fears a little bit. But 13 minutes from the crack of midnight when the gates opened was when the first vulnerability report out of over 1,000 in a 3-week period was received. Out of that number, 138 actual vulnerabilities were found and validated and fixed. They were all fixed within a few weeks after the bug bounty period was closed. So that was a great effort on the part of the Pentagon. It was a great effort and a great showing by the hackers. But it was a little much to handle in 21 days. So for Hack the Army, which was the next iteration, we made sure that we limited the number of participants to 400 hackers max. And if you look at the total reports received, the signal-to-noise ratio significantly improved. That's good for defenders. It did only take them 5 minutes to turn in a report, though, so another lesson learned was don't start your bug bounty programs at midnight. So what's about to happen next, right? Are we looking at a tidal wave, a tsunami of bug bounty programs? While that sounds great, we have had some significant bounty programs announced, or the intent to run bounty programs announced in the United States and even here in Europe. The budget approved for the free and open source software being under a bug bounty. But here's the thing. What happens if you don't actually scope these things properly? Well, I gave you some of the numbers that happened with the Pentagon, Hack the Pentagon versus Hack the Army. But other things happen too. Scope can be a little bit tricky to get right the first time. What's included, what's not? How many hackers are participating? How would you actually limit them? So often, organizations get overwhelmed. And even worse, even if they hire a company to help them at the beginning and sort through all those reports and only hand them the real vulnerabilities, if they haven't done their own homework and their own securing of their systems and their own scanning first, they're in trouble because they're going to get a lot of serious vulnerabilities and a lot of things to fix very quickly. So what are we doing when it comes to supply chain, IoT, cars, pacemakers, all of these technologies that we depend on? Does everybody need a bug bounty all of a sudden? Well, in supply chain, things get really complicated. You're not the only one who is responsible for fixing a bug on your phone, even if you make the phone. There is an entire ecosystem in this device, including the user. So it's complicated. There's a maturity model for it. I could spend another 20 minutes talking about that, but apparently I have 2 minutes and 34 seconds left. So what's next? Well, happily, the UK government, NCSC, had partnered with my company and announced it a couple of months ago that it is not doing a bug bounty program. It is building a vulnerability coordination program. In their blog post, they actually talk about the fact that, of course, they've coordinated vulnerabilities before. Of course, they've received vulnerability reports. But they want to do it better. They want to do it in a way that is adaptable, agile, repeatable, and a way that they can share that knowledge and their transparency with the rest of the government and with the people that need to use it the most. Businesses, individuals. They are actually looking at this from a holistic approach and building maturity into their coordination process. So someone will eventually disclose a vulnerability to you, to someone you know. Your friends or family may become victims of ransomware because they didn't apply all the available patches. Very unlikely that your friends or family would be targeted by a state-sponsored actor, but you never know. So what can you do? Well, you have to assess your ability to receive vulnerability reports, even if you have that protective layer of a third-party company filtering them for you. You have to be able to fix them. You can't just copy what seemed to have worked for somebody else. It's not possible to get by that way. So setting goals, figuring out what it is that you want. In that IE example, it was they wanted the bugs, they were going to get the bugs, but they wanted them sooner. So think about what it is that you want, and then obviously, you should be trying to build security in, even if you don't build software, you should be trying to roll out things and deploy them more securely and understand that your security job isn't done. So the mistakes you can make are pretty obvious. Failing to plan and having no capacity, really, to have an ongoing and somewhat bursty amount of traffic that may come in from the outside. The other thing is trying to control it too much. Remember that continuum we had? We had that continuum where penetration testing is a very controlled activity, right? When I look at some of the proposed bug bounty programs and I see some of our military leaders talking about how the individual participants must be highly vetted, I say that, well, that sounds like a penetration test to me. What about your capacity for anyone to tell you about a vulnerability? There was a Syrian researcher who reached out to Microsoft and said, I have something for the $100,000 bug bounty. Syria is obviously under trade embargo with the United States, so we could not possibly pay him. So I told him that. I did not accept his entry. I said, please don't send it. We can't pay you. He said, you know what? I'm going to send it anyway. If you restrict who can tell you about your security issues, you restrict potential allies anywhere in the world. Hackers are a little nonconformist. So it's not necessarily true that somebody from a country that you may have some sort of an issue with wouldn't be able to help you defend yourself. I know we're here at NATO, but the internet is worldwide. I couldn't help myself. When I was flying over that whole Kofifi, I can't pronounce it. But the fact of the matter is, even as NATO countries, we need to look at the internet as one. So when we look at the theater of the absurd, and what we've been repeating in terms of mistakes and narrow-mindedness, I think it's time to stop, because anything else would be absurd. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. I think we have time for one question.
Oh, wow.
If you're okay. Do you have any questions?
I can't see out there.
Okay, I have a question of my own then.
Okay.
Can these bug bounty programs and the awards compete with the black market incentives in a way?
That is a great question. So can bug bounties compete with the rewards of the black market, or what I call the offense market, because it's currently not illegal to acquire these things, right? It may be illegal to export them, but that's a different story. You can't compete on price, but there are things that are priceless. So, for example, I don't know if you saw some of the pictures from Hack the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense at the time, Ash Carter, called 2 of the hackers to the Pentagon to receive special recognition and, the whole coin handshake thing that happens, right? One of them was a high school student. When I look at the future, because I'm a pink-haired old lady of the internet, when I look at kids these days, and I think to myself, what if there had been the ability for me to hack the Pentagon when I was 18? That would have been so great. I wouldn't have needed money. I would have definitely wanted that coin. So there are rewards and incentives that are more important to people than money: recognition and pursuit of intellectual happiness.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And there are many karaoke bars in the old town, so tonight hopefully we can arrange something.